Hello, my name is Mara, and welcome to Books Like Whoa. So today I wanted to do a quick video about if you like X, then you might like Y. So I imagine that this is something I'll do with some frequency here on my channel, but today is going to be kind of the first installment of if you like this, then maybe you'd like that. And to kick off this series, I thought I would tackle Twilight. My history with Twilight is that I read it when I was in middle school. This would have been before it was super popular, but it was when it was sort of gaining momentum. And a good friend of mine kind of mentioned to me, you know what? If you like Harry Potter, I bet you might like this. Now, in retrospect, I think what she meant by that was that if you are okay with kind of like fantastical elements, if you like supernatural things, Harry Potter has that, and so does Twilight. But unfortunately, that's sort of where the similarities end, and I have to say that Twilight was really just sort of not my cup of tea. I think the deal breaker for me was when I essentially came to realize that he was sitting in class thinking about drinking her blood, and that was described kind of in the way I would expect it would be described if he had a boner for her in class, and I just was like, you know what? I'm not here for your blood boners. I'm not here for you thinking that you can drink her like a Capri Sun and that's fine. Like, I just wasn't into it. And actually, for a long time, it made me think I just didn't like vampire novels, period. However, as time went on and I kind of dipped my toes into paranormal romance and just paranormal worlds in general, actually, the more I read paranormal, the more I kind of thought, you know what, maybe I gave up on Twilight too soon. Maybe I actually would have enjoyed it a little bit more if I was more familiar with the tropes that go along in that genre. You know, Twilight gets kind of a bad rap, and like I said, that does include me as well, because I didn't really like Twilight very much, but I think that there's a reason why people find it so compelling, right? There's a few different things that are going on. I think that it's really highly serialized, so you're really invested in keeping reading so that you can find out what happens. I think that we've realized, based on the plethora of these in young adult, that love triangles are very compelling for people to keep up with. And I also just think that the whole paranormal element, where it's kind of like our world but kind of not, is a real hook point for some people. So the good news is that if you look at those components of Twilight and not at some of the things that I had a problem with, things like the writing, things like some of the relationship dynamics not being my favorite, various other things, I think you can put those to the side and look at some of those other key elements of the series and say, okay, yeah, there's definitely other books out there that have some of those key ingredients just like Twilight does. So to be fair, a lot of people who I see kind of saying, oh, I really liked Twilight, or I enjoyed Twilight, it's kind of prefaced by saying, well, I read it when I was a middle schooler, when I was in high school, whatever. So I kind of wonder if some of that might also just be nostalgia, the same way that I have nostalgia for some things that if I read them now, I'd be like, yeah, no. So with all that being said, I thought that I might give some recommendations for if you did like Twilight, if you read it as a young adult and you have nostalgia for it, and or if you have read it as an adult and just liked it. Thought I would give maybe some recommendations of places you could go next. So the first most obvious recommendation is the Sookie Stackhouse novels. I think if you're looking for something that has the serialized drama, if you're looking for something that is very vampire heavy, and if you are looking for something that definitely has a very strong romantic element to it, I think the Sookie Stackhouse novels by Charlaine are a very good place to start. They're clearly very popular. There was a very popular HBO series based on those books, and I do think it's sort of just like light, campy fun. I would say that it's not super heavy into the angst, so if that's something that was a kind of an important component of your enjoyment of the Twilight books, then this might not quite deliver on that piece of the puzzle. But I do think that it delivers in terms of a lot of the other elements that made Twilight very successful. And actually, it was also the series that kind of made me realize, you know what, I may enjoy some romances with vampires in them. Maybe I jumped the gun too quickly when I said I didn't like those based on my experience with Twilight. The next author I want to recommend is who I think is maybe the most direct parallel from Stephenie Meyer in terms of it's pretty high angst. There's definitely a very heavy romantic element, and it is definitely all about the vampires. That is Amanda Ashley. Now, I've read the first book in her Bound series called Bound by Night, and to be honest, it was not my cup of tea. In the same way that Twilight was not my cup of tea, which is part of why I'm saying if you liked Twilight a lot, then this might work for you. I tend to like my paranormals and just romances in general with not so much angst, but Amanda Ashley definitely has that, which I feel like is comparable to the Twilight series. I think her more popular series is called Children of the Night, and I haven't read any of those because, like I said, for me, the one that I did read, I realized just didn't quite have the trope mix that I enjoy in paranormal romances. But that being said, if you enjoyed kind of the mix of heavy emphasis on the love part, kind of the will they, won't they, in terms of is this normal girl going to be turned into a vampire at some point, and just again sort of like the emotional emphasis in the story, I think Amanda Ashley might actually be a pretty smooth transition for you. So the third author that I want to recommend to people who enjoy Twilight is Lindsey Sands. Now, Lindsey Sands is one of my sort of guilty pleasure reads, which I hate saying because I think the whole idea of a guilty pleasure is kind of BS. I mean, if you enjoy something, you should just enjoy it. Like, don't feel guilty about it. Life is too short to feel bad about what books you read. But I just say that to give you sort of an example of the type of writing that's here. So Lindsey Sands writes a series of vampire novels. I think they're called the Argeneau novels because a lot of the main characters are from the Argeneau family. But basically, in her world, vampires are descendants from the lost city of Atlantis, and their vampirism is actually a form of nanotechnology that the Atlanteans developed to repair your body at an extremely rapid rate, and its sort of agent by which it does that is blood. Hence, vampires need for a constant blood supply. So that's one thing I like about it, is that it's a little bit of a different take on the vampire lore. And because there's not a supernatural element to vampires, because it is purely just like a result of genetics, basically, she doesn't take her vampires nearly as seriously as some of the other series that use vampires do. I find that it's a lot more lighthearted. They're usually pretty humorous books, and I think of them really just sort of as like brain candy. They're just light, fluffy, and very enjoyable. The other nice thing about Lindsey Sands' books is that you don't necessarily need to read them in order because they're much more episodic rather than serialized. So while that is different from Twilight, if part of what you liked about Twilight was that it was an ongoing plot that really built in each book, you're not going to get that from Lindsey Sands. There are kind of overarching plot lines throughout the series, but it's really more of a book-to-book kind of series. But the upside of that is that you can sort of start anywhere. And my recommendation of the best place to start is with the second book, which is called Love Bites. I think it's a little stronger than the first one, and it gives you a sense of the type of romances that she writes in these series, as well as what her humor is like. So I think that's a great place to start if you're interested in Lindsey Sands' vampire novels. And last, but certainly not least, I want to talk about a series that I really, really enjoy. I'm sure it's something that you will hear me bring up frequently on this channel, but it is a paranormal romance series that doesn't have vampires in it, so I'll give you that caveat right now. If what you loved about Twilight was the vampires, this does not have that, so I grant that. But in the Twilight novels, there are also werewolves, right? So is my kind of justification for putting this series on the list, and that is Marini Sings' Psy-Changeling series. So I'll say off the bat, like I mentioned, there are not vampires in here, but there are shapeshifters or were creatures. So there are were panthers and werewolves are the two main groups of kind of shape-shifting beings that are in this book, as well as a group of paranormal beings that are called Psy. And Psy are kind of, you can almost think of them as sort of like X-Men in terms of they have, well, let's rephrase that. You can kind of think of them almost like the X-Men who have psychic or mind-based abilities. So like think Professor X, somebody like that. And what they can do is essentially they are telepathic, and then they can also use their mind to do various other specific powers. So some of them might be really strong telekinetics, right? Some of them may have very strong healing powers with their minds, things like that. So basically, this is a world where the Psy and the shapeshifters are sort of at war. There's a lot of unrest in the Psy world because of something called silence, and it's hard to kind of give you a brief synopsis of what all the dynamics in this world are, because it actually is, I think, impressively kind of complicated, considering this is a popular fiction series. I think that there's a lot going on in it, and there's a lot to sort of trace throughout the books and get your teeth into. But the reason why I recommend this for people who enjoyed Twilight is that it is very, very serialized, right? So if part of what you liked about Twilight was that there was an overarching plot where there were characters recurring, where there was a strong romantic element, these books have all of that. I just think that they're better written, they're better plotted, and I think the world building is more complete and credible. So if you kind of enjoyed some of those aspects of Twilight, I think that this is a really nice kind of way to grow in your reading in the paranormal genre, because I do think that this is a series that's pretty widely considered to be one of the better ones in terms of just like quality and plot and consistency among characters. The other thing is that the romances in here I think are really, really well done. They don't have a lot of the problematic elements of the Twilight romance, and I won't get into that too much, but if you have any, kind of familiarity with Twilight, I think you kind of know of some of the critiques with respect to healthy relationship dynamics and feminism, things like that. What I like about these is that the romances are very, fulfilling. They're very entertaining. You get invested in them, and they're a lot hotter, I think, because, well, for one, there's, actually sex written throughout. But then I also just think that the characters themselves are better rounded out, and therefore their attraction, when it finally kind of all works out, is a lot more fulfilling. So I think this is a great place of, if you liked Twilight as a young adult and you're wanting to branch out into more adult paranormal, this might be a great place to go. I'm holding up The Heart of Obsidian, which is my favorite in the series to date, but there are, goodness, I want to say about 15 to 16 books in this series so far. And a piece of good news about the way this series is being handled is that essentially what Nalini Singh has done is sort of plotted out various plot arcs over certain numbers of books. So the first, let's say, 14 books in this series were on one kind of set of overall plot developments, and she's actually wrapped that up and is now starting sort of a second cycle in this series, which I think gives me a lot of hope that the series is going to stay really entertaining and well written, because it doesn't just have to limp along with one set of kind of overall serialized plot goals. She kind of has set herself up with new conflict. So this is one of the later books in the first cycle. I think this is book maybe number 12-ish, and it's really, really, really good. It's, like I said, my favorite in the series, and I would say that the series is one of my all-time favorites. But in terms of where to start with this series, I do think it's something, because it's quite serialized, like I've mentioned, that you do have to start at the beginning, even though I would tell you that I don't think that the first two books are the best in the series, particularly the first one. So my recommendation is, if you have the time and patience to do this, if you read the first book, if there's anything in there that you find enjoyable, entertaining, worth continuing to pursue, I would say keep reading till the third book, because I think the third book is actually one of the strongest in the whole series. And if you get to that point and still don't like it, then I don't think you'll like the series at all. But I think if you get to the third book and then your interest level jumps, at that point you'll be really invested, and that'll give you the juice to get all the way through. So I do think you need to start at the beginning, but like I said, I think the third book is where it really gets good. So that's all my recommendations for, if you like Twilight, then maybe you would like one of these series that I mentioned. Like I said, I think that this is something that I will do on this channel from time to time, because I find these types of videos really helpful and kind of a way to get new ideas about what to try. So I hope that you find it also interesting and helpful. If you do, please let me know any thoughts, comments, feelings, opinions, whatever that you have in the comments below. Like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias, whatever. I'm just glad that you're here. Yeah, and that wraps up this video. So hopefully I will see you guys soon. Bye.